Welcome to my talk. This is automated emotion, facial animation in Star Wars: The Old Republic. And I'm Ben Cloward, Senior Technical Artist at BioWare. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get going. First of all, please fill out your evaluation sheets. I'd really like to get your feedback and hear what you thought of the talk. Also, please turn off your cell phones so we're not interrupted by those. And just one last item. I'm really sorry about this. I'd love to be able to stick around after and talk to you guys, but I have a flight that leaves at 4:30, so I'm going to be sprinting for the taxi as soon as I'm done here. So if you'd like to ask me additional questions after it's done, I'm going to put my email address up here, and you can definitely send me email. Tell me it was horrible or you really liked it or whatever you want. But I'm going to need to take off when I'm done here. So with that, let's get going. First of all, just a brief introduction of myself. I was an animator for about 7 years before I became a technical artist. I really enjoy writing shaders. I enjoy making tools for artists, but today we're talking about facial animation. When I do facial animation the way that I like to do it, I do it all hand-keyed. I love hand-keying characters. And it's really fun to bring a character to life and feel like you've placed all the keyframes and really brought out the soul of the character by creating this facial performance. And when I had my interview at BioWare, I was really excited because BioWare's products are all focused on conversations between characters. They have, of course, they have combat and they have exploration. But recently we've been talking about adding this fourth pillar to the MMO space. That's kind of a catchphrase that they use, which is this element of story and really bringing storytelling and good writing into the MMO space. So this was a really neat opportunity. I thought, wow, I can go work at BioWare. Their emphasis is on bringing these characters to life, and I can just do all this facial animation. So I was really excited about that. So I should have a great time working at this kind of company because this is the kind of work that I really enjoy. However, I really had no idea what I was getting into. So let me just kind of put our project into perspective for you. Star Wars: The Old Republic has hundreds of thousands of lines of dialogue. And what does that mean exactly? This is a really big number. First of all, it's more dialogue than all of our previous BioWare games combined. So Jade Empire, Mass Effect, Knights of the Old Republic, all of the previous BioWare games put together have less audio dialogue than Star Wars: The Old Republic does. When it ships, Star Wars: The Old Republic will have more voiceover dialogue than any other game ever made. And it's also probably the largest voiceover project ever, not just in video games, but including movies, television, you name it. So this is just a massive undertaking that we're dealing with, and it's easy to feel sort of this crushing weight of the amount of work that we have to do. I was just in the Uncharted talk where they were talking about how they were setting up their faces so that the animators could, do these really nice performances. And I was just sitting there going, man, I really wish that I could do that kind of work. Because on our project, well, let's jump to the next part. I did some back-of-the-napkin math. Like I said, I really like to hand-key facial animation. And when I do facial animation by hand, I can typically do about 30 seconds of dialogue in about 4 hours. That's, really bringing the character to life, giving him a soul, delivering a quality performance that matches the emotion that the voice actor is bringing. So if I were to do that, we could ship our game in 164 years. Or if I were to work a normal schedule, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, that would take me 164 years to complete that dialogue. And we could ship our game in the year 2173. But I think some of you probably want to play it before then. So why don't we just throw some more people at the problem? What if we take 4 animators and we say, you guys have no life and you have no holidays and you'll work around the clock? It would still take 10 years for 4 guys working 24/7, 365. So I think it's pretty obvious that we definitely have a problem. Well, let's talk about that problem a little bit. First of all, it's obvious that people just aren't fast enough. We can't do the work. We can do really good work, but the work that we do is much too slow for this kind of a project. So the obvious solution to that is to just let the computer do it, right? Because there are all kinds of off-the-shelf software packages that will do lip sync animation. And if we just grab one of those and throw it at the problem, we should be able to do a pretty good job. Well, the problem there is that computers can't animate. So if you just give a lip sync program some phoneme shapes and give it the audio and say, go ahead, you'll get some pretty lifeless performances. And I'll show you a video in a minute of what that looks like. And the other problem is that our lead animator and our art director want the look of hand-keyed animation. They want us to reach that quality, but they want us to be able to do it without taking the 164 years. And so today I'm going to talk about the solution that we came up with for this problem. There are probably lots of different solutions that we could use, but the one that we settled on, and this is probably the core concept of my talk, is that we break the facial performance down into a couple of key elements. We have phonemes, we have facial expressions, and we have head movements and eye movements. So we're going to talk about these 3 different categories of elements of the facial performance. We have our animators create a wide variety of variations of each of these different elements of the performance. And then we take the available information and we teach the computer how to intelligently choose which item from the phonemes am I going to pick, which items from the head movements am I going to choose, which item from the expressions, and bring those together to create the final performance. So using the computer's speed and the human's quality, because our animators are creating these individual assets, that's how we gain both the quality and the speed that we need. So here's an overview of the things that we're going to talk about today. First of all, we're going to talk about sort of the art angle of it, which are creating the elements, the phoneme shapes, facial expressions, and head and eye movements. And then we're going to talk about putting it all together, or how we get the computer to select the correct different elements of the facial performance. So first of all, let's talk about creating the phoneme shapes and the lip sync. Now, in order to do that, I need to step back a little bit and talk about our facial rig. When I do facial animation, I really enjoy using morph targets or blend shapes to do facial animation, because it gives you really precise control over the shapes that you're getting. But for our particular project, we weren't able to use blend shapes for one main reason, and that's because we have all of these different kinds of characters, and we need the same animation to work regardless of what kind of crazy alien anatomy we've got, right? So we have to be able to take one facial performance and apply it to any kind of alien character. And the way that we do that, first of all, we start out with our bones rig, and these are our bones. We have eyebrows, eyelids, eyes, cheeks, lips, jaw, and there's one inside that you can't see for the tongue. And then we very carefully weight our meshes to this set of bones. So all the aliens that you saw on the previous slide these guys would all get weighted to that same set of bones. So regardless of where the mouth is or where the eyes are, we'll still weight each particular alien to the bones that we have. So for example, this alien down here in the lower right with one eyeball, we actually had to weight that one eyeball half to the right eye and half to the left eye, which is kind of an interesting solution, but it worked out in the end. And just kind of a side note to that, when we're doing the eyes, normally you'd think of an eyeball as a rotation, but we actually did our eyes as a translation. And the reason that we did that is because our characters have their eyes in lots of different places, and if we translate the bones, then we can weight the vertices of the eyeballs to those bones that translate, and it moves the iris around. Not the best way to do it if you want a super realistic human character, but in this case, because we had eyeballs all over the place, it was a good solution for what we needed to do. So that's kind of our character rig overview. Whoa. So let's talk about phoneme shapes. Phoneme shapes are mouth shapes that represent each of the different sounds that can be made during speech. So this is our set of phoneme shapes. And one of the things that we learned along the way when we were creating our phonemes is that you need to do a lot of iteration in order to get a correct set of phoneme shapes. You have a list of the different sounds that your character needs to make, and you usually start out just by making a shape for each of the sounds in your list. What we learned is that if you just sort of naively make a shape for each sound, what you get is really not the best quality, because each shape doesn't really relate very well to all of the rest of the shapes. So during speech, each shape is going to blend into and out of lots of other shapes, and they all have to work well together. And that's the key to making good lip sync animation. And so what we did is we would make a set of shapes, and then we had a large set of maybe 15 or 20 sample audio files, and we would use that sample audio in our shapes to generate some animation. Then we would check out how that was looking and find problems that became apparent when the shapes were being blended into and out of each other. And, so a lot of times we would find a shape that was like way too big, or one of the phonemes was too subtle, and you just couldn't see that. For example, our M and P and B phoneme, where the lips are pressed together, it started out too subtle at first, and you couldn't really get that nice, crisp lip press, and so we ended up going back and pressing the lips a little bit tighter together just so that you could really get that consonant shape. So we would go in and adjust the shapes, and then we would repeat this process until we had a good result, until we had really decent lip sync animation. So one example of where this process of iteration paid off for us was in the corners of the mouth. When we first made our phoneme shapes, we just sort of arbitrarily put the corners where we thought they should go for each individual sound. And when we analyzed our audio, the mouth corners seemed really jittery. The guy would talk and the corners of his mouth would just be bouncing all over the place. And so the first thing that we tried to fix this problem was to just tone down the movement of the mouth corners. We went back to each of our phoneme shapes and we just moved the mouth corners closer to their original positions. But that really sort of killed the performance, and it made the corners feel like they were sort of cemented in place. And so what we ended up doing to fix the problem is we took the mouth corner animations out of the phoneme shapes completely. And instead of putting them in each individual phoneme shape, we made 4 extreme shapes for the mouth corner positions. One all the way out, one all the way in, one up, and one down. And then for each phoneme shape, we gave that shape a percentage along the spectrum of in and out and up and down, right? So that each of the phoneme shapes would would be somewhere along this line, up or in and out, or up or down. So, for example, the E sound would be 100% out, and the OO phoneme shape would be 100% in. This is kind of like what Jason Osipa talks about in his book, Stop Staring. So that brings us to our first sample video. And what I want you to see in this video is that after iteration, after refining our phoneme shapes, we've done a pretty good job of helping the computer to automate the process of animating our dialogue. Now, if I were to get this line of dialogue and animate it myself, I could do a much better job. But again, considering that it would probably take me about 4 hours to do this, and the computer did it in 2 seconds, I think that's a pretty good trade-off. So let's take a look.
Good day. I'm Major Innerook of the Imperial Reclamation Service. I realize you're merely an acolyte, but I require your assistance with my excavation. Our empire has a long and glorious history, but much has been lost. My group recovers forgotten pieces of our past. Each artifact and relic we recover increases our knowledge and guides us toward our ultimate destiny.
So I think that we've done a pretty good job of creating this automated facial performance. Now, one thing that you may have noticed is that he's just kind of delivering the line, and there's not a whole lot going on with his face. And so this is kind of what you get by default if you just hand the computer, a nice set of phoneme shapes and tell it, here, animate my face for me. And that works okay for this kind of a line of dialogue where the character's just sort of delivering some information and he's not really emoting and he's not really passionate about his performance. However, let's take a look at this next video, and I think that you'll notice here that there's something missing.
My passions run deeper than yours. I am the true essence of what it is to be Sith. My legacy has suffered long enough. After today, you will be forgotten. It ends here and now.
So did you miss something there? I really love this example because it shows off so well, what you don't get when you just let the computer animate the face for you. So we knew that we needed to go back in and somehow get facial expressions into our performance. So the first thing that we did is we identified 5 key emotions that were sort of universal human emotions that we wanted our characters to be able to express: disgust, joy, fear, sadness, and anger. And we created these facial expressions by posing our face bones, and then, these are our 5 key emotions. And then we also knew that we were going to, or the computer was going to know what the punctuation was at the end of the phrases. And so we went ahead and we created a variation of each of these 5, depending on whether it was a statement, a question, or an exclamation. So when people are talking, if they're fearful, they're going to express their fear differently if they're asking a question than if they're exclaiming something. And so we tried to capture that in these variations because we knew that the computer would have that bit of information when it put the performances together. And then, in addition to that, we also knew that we were going to have some specific characters in our game. We were going to have bounty hunters. We were going to have smugglers. And, smugglers just aren't smugglers without the sly expression and sometimes the bootlick expression. So we went ahead and threw those into the mix as well. And so with our core set and also our special set, we put those together, and that gives us a total of 27 facial expressions or 27 individual emotions that our characters can make. One of the things that we tried to do is to pick emotions and expressions that can be identified with just a single frame. There are some emotions or some expressions that people can do that if you just see a snapshot, they're sort of ambiguous and you can't tell. If someone's being sarcastic, you can't tell that from just a single snapshot. You need some vocal clues or some body language or something additionally to that. And so we tried to not go with those kinds of emotions, just ones that you could tell from a single snapshot what is it that that character's feeling. And if we needed to do something like sarcasm, we would depend on the voice actor or the body language that gets added in later. Now, in addition to these 27, we knew that we were going to have so much dialogue and that these expressions would be used over and over and over. And so we went ahead and we created 3 variations of each of the 27 expressions so that the computer can randomly pick. If it knows, I want to use an angry expression, it has 3 different angry expressions to choose from. Now, one of the things that we learned about the expressions is that we had to keep the mouth fairly subtle in the expressions. And the reason for that was that the mouth, the expressions were additive with the talking animation. And so normally if you did an angry expression, you would want it to be like this, right? But if the character's making this face and he's also got to talk, it kind of messes it up. And so we had to go back in and tone that down and put most of the expression in the character's eyebrows and eyelids and just kind of hint at the expression in the mouth. So that brings us to our next sample video. And this is going to show you some before and after images of what it looked like before we got the facial expressions working, and then once we put them in.
What's the matter, Corso? Did I hurt your feelings? Be thankful you're alive, kid. What's the matter, Corso? Did I hurt your feelings? Be thankful you're alive, kid. You're too young to own a ship like this. Be honest. You borrowed it from your parents, right? You're too young to own a ship like this. Be honest. You borrowed it from your parents, right? What makes you think I care? What makes you think I care?
All right, so we're starting to achieve, the same passion and the same expression that our very talented voiceover actors are expressing. We're starting to be able to get them into the facial animation as well. Now, I mentioned we had to tone down the mouth expressions, and that was a little disappointing to us, especially for our angry faces, because we really wanted the mouth to look angry when the character was talking. We knew that we were going to have a lot of Sith characters, for example, and that they were just going to need to express this anger. And so what we did to solve that problem is we went back in and we created a second set of phonemes specifically for angry speech. And we made that set of phonemes additive with the first set. So it's kind of like having a slider where over here it's 0 and over here it's 100%, and we were able to dial in, how much of these angry phonemes do we want to add into the performance. Then for each expression that the characters could make, associated with that expression, we would assign it what percentage of angry do we want to use. So for example, the extremely enraged expression would have 100% of our angry phonemes activated, but the happy expression would have obviously none of the angry phonemes. And so here's our next example video, and this one's kind of subtle. You need to look really carefully at the mouth. We're going to take a look at a couple of examples of before and after using the angry phonemes.
You are guilty of crimes against the oppressed people of Ord Mantell. The sentence is death. You are guilty of crimes against the oppressed people of Ord Mantell. The sentence is death. You filthy alien scum. You dare invade this fortress and murder my people? You filthy alien scum. You dare invade this fortress and murder my people?
So I hope that you can see that, but the mouth is just a little bit crisper. When he's doing his vowels, the lip is raised just a little bit, kind of in a sneer, and when he's doing his M and P consonants, the lips are pressed just a little bit harder together so you can feel that anger that he has in his tone of voice, and it carries over into his facial performance. So then the last bit of the performance that we wanted to do was the head and eye movements. And first of all, we had our animators go in and create a lot of eye darting sequences. Because when you look at someone talking, their eyes aren't fixed, kind of like a statue. Their eyes kind of jitter around and dart. And I feel like that is one of the things that a lot of times is too subtle and people forget to put it in. But when it's there, it really brings a character to life. And then we also had the animators create head movements, and we kind of put them in buckets. So we have one bucket for short phrases, one bucket for medium phrases, maybe another bucket for a little bit longer, and then another bucket for really long phrases that the characters had to say. And then within those buckets, we also created head movements for specific emotions. So a character would move differently if he was sad versus if he was happy or angry. So we had variations depending on the length of the phrase and also depending on the expression that the character was moving or emoting. So let's take a look at another video. This is before we added the head movements and then after we got the head movements working.
Little good the humbling will do with her dead. Little good the humbling will do with her dead. Now, the last prisoner, the forger, letting him go was highly questionable. Explain yourself. Now, the last prisoner, the forger, letting him go was highly questionable. Explain yourself. Never waste a potential resource. A trained assassin who demonstrated fortitude and amorality, the Empire could have utilized her skills. Never waste a potential resource. A trained assassin who demonstrated fortitude and amorality, the Empire could have utilized her skills.
So the head movements are kind of like this last piece of the puzzle. So we've got our phoneme shapes, we have our facial expressions, and now adding the head movements on top, it just really brings the performance together. So that ends the first part of the talk, and we're going to go over now how we put all this together. We have phoneme shapes, expressions, head movements. Somehow the computer has to select the correct items to put together based on the information that we have. Well, let's talk for a minute about what we know or what the computer can know when it's trying to decide. What information do we have available? First of all, we know how long our phrases are. We know how many letters there are in each phrase, and we know from the audio file exactly how long that phrase is. We also know what the punctuation is at the end of the phrase, and this is something that we talked about when we were talking about the facial expressions. And we also have the audio file, and we have the text typed out for what the characters are saying in each of their lines of dialogue. And just kind of as a last helper to the system, we also assign each of our characters a personality. So we have a vengeful character, we have a sad character, and the writers are able to go in and assign each character its personality, and that helps the computer know which elements to select. So let's go over each of the elements, and I'll talk about what process the computer uses to choose. So first of all, with our phoneme shapes, this is probably the easiest of the items to select because we already have all this off-the-shelf software that does it. At BioWare, we use FaceEffects, and FaceEffects will analyze both the text and the audio file together so that it identifies the correct consonants and vowel sounds. It uses the audio and the text to give a more correct result. You can do it with just the audio file, but you always end up with better results if you provide the text for it as well. So it selects and combines the phonemes based on its analysis. And you may have also noticed in some of the before examples, like before the head movement, that there was just some subtle head movement in there. FaceEffects goes ahead and adds that in, but it's really not enough to sell the performance, and that's why we needed the animators to actually create head movements and also the facial expressions. So that's how our phoneme shapes are chosen. Let's talk about how our facial expressions are chosen next. First of all, of our total set of 27 facial expressions, we narrow down which facial expressions are available to each character based on their personality. So, for example, an angry character might have a set of 8 facial expressions that he can use instead of the entire set of 27. Then that subset of 8 is narrowed down further based on the punctuation at the end of the phrase, so depending on if it's a period, a question mark, or an exclamation. And finally, say we have 3 left based on the punctuation at the end. The computer will randomly pick one of those 3. And then now remember that each of them has its own set of 3 variations. So it'll go ahead, and once it picks one of those 3, it'll pick another random one of the to get the final expression that it's going to use. And then finally, how does the computer select which head movement to use? Well, we kind of already talked about this a little bit. Of the total head movements, it's going to go through and narrow it down based on the length of the phrase, first of all. And then since we've already selected a facial expression to use, it's going to base its further narrowing down based on which facial expression was already selected. So we have a set of head movements that are appropriate for an angry expression, a set of head movements that are appropriate for a happy expression, etc. And then if we haven't narrowed it down all the way, whatever's left, it'll pick a random one. And so this is how we select the items. And what I'd like to talk about next is the process that the computer goes through to make all of these individual things happen. First of all, we have the text of the lines that are being spoken. And we run our text through a pre-process filter to set it up so that it's all okay for being analyzed for animation. So here's an example line of dialogue. And we see we have, punctuation. We have some commas in here. We even have a little dash. And we have to run this text through. This is straight from the writers. We have to run this text through the pre-process filter to make sure that it's all set up correctly. The first thing that we do is we remove punctuation from phrases that are too short. So, for example, this please, that's just a single syllable for an entire phrase. And it's really difficult to animate a head movement that fits with something that goes so quickly. And it's hard to dial in and dial out a facial expression for something that moves so quickly. If you were animating this by hand, sure, you could probably do a good job of that. But if the computer is selecting a head movement and an expression to try to go with something that's a single syllable, it doesn't handle that very well. So we just go ahead and remove that exclamation mark there, and we concatenate that phrase so it becomes, please, I'm a fellow Sith, and that's a phrase that's a little bit more manageable. The next thing that we do is we go through and we replace all the commas with periods. A comma breaks up a phrase, but a comma is not a character that the computer identifies. It uses periods, exclamation marks, and question marks. And so the nice thing about replacing the commas is now we've broken our sentence into more phrases that the computer can use. So it's going to assign an expression to each phrase. So now we've added an additional couple of phrases in there that the computer can use and add additional facial expressions. And so here's our text. And then the last thing that we do is we replace the final punctuation with a symbol that actually represents the specific facial expression that the computer has chosen. And to just kind of show you what I'm talking about, here is our set of facial expressions and the symbol that goes along with each of these. Now, when I was putting my slide deck together, I kind of ran this by my wife, and I was saying, what do you think of the talk? And she saw this slide, and she said, you can't show that. That's the secret sauce. But really, there's nothing special about the symbols that we've chosen here. There's nothing magical about these. This is just some specific symbols that we tried to make. We tried to pick symbols that probably wouldn't be in our localization text. So in the languages that we knew we were going to translate into, we knew there was no language with the @ symbol built into the dialogue, for example. So these are all the symbols that represent the facial expressions. And this is what our final text looks like. So we've replaced the punctuation there with a $, which means that phrase is going to use the sad, miserable expression. We've replaced the punctuation in the next phrase there, which means it's going to use a sad, melancholy expression. And we've replaced the punctuation of the final phrase with the pound symbol, which means it's going to be using the sad, disappointed expression. And the nice thing about doing it this way is that now that these symbols are in here, this text becomes the authoritative version of what expressions are going to be used. So we can reprocess this text over and over and over again, and every time the computer is going to be picking these same expressions. And I'll get into that more detail in a little bit. So this is what we end up with for the final dialogue of that phrase.
Please, I am a fellow Sith. Judge me with an open mind and grant me trial by combat, I beg you.
So did you see the 3 distinct facial expressions that he had in there? So we've analyzed our text, and we have our audio file, and we pass this information into our super powerful computer, and we end up with our final voiceover, dialogue, and facial animation. So I want to talk about the final results that we were able to achieve. We worked really closely with OC3, the company that makes face effects, to make sure that this batch analysis process was multi-threaded. And we got a really nice box, a computer with 8 processors and tons of RAM. And we're able to submit our dialogue and our processed text to this computer in really large batches. And the nice thing about this, because it doesn't require any animator retouching when it's done, we can redo this over and over again. You know, we can go back in and tweak facial expressions. We can change head movements and reprocess our animation and get good results. And it works because we don't actually have to make any changes once it's done. And so if we needed to, we're at a point in the speed of this process where if we needed to, we could have the dialogue for the entire game generated, batch processed in less than a week. So when you compare that with our initial estimate of 164 years, I think that we've come up with a pretty good solution to the problem. As I said before, you know, if I were to animate each of these individual things, it would definitely look better, but we would never finish the project. So now I want to talk a little bit about how the system integrates with the design tools. Once all of the audio has been processed, then you can go in the game and you can talk to all the characters, and they actually have facial animation to go along with the audio. But sometimes the computer picks the wrong expression. For example, if you have a character whose personality is defined as angry, but in this one particular line, he's saying something and he needs to be happy. Well, the designer has a tool that shows each line of dialogue or each phrase, and below that phrase is a drop-down box. And in the drop-down is available all of the different expressions. And the one that's currently selected is the one that the computer is currently using. So the designer can go back in and select, oh, I want him to be happy here instead. You know, you picked miserable, but he's really supposed to be happy, so I'll change that. Then you can hit reprocess, and it will update that for you. And the goal of the system is to get all the lines of dialogue to maybe 80% or 90% of the way done so that the designers can go back in and change things if they need to, but they don't have to. So this talk focused mostly on the facial animation, but our designers also have similar tools for staging, for camera setup, for character placement, for lighting. And all of these tools come together to allow the designers to quickly create a conversation. And that's essential because like I talked about at the beginning, we just have an enormous amount of work to do. And we could probably give, 4 or 5 other GDC talks on, each of these other individual systems, but they all come together to allow our designers to really quickly go through and assemble these conversations between our characters. And so the complete package of these tools is a powerful system that makes the creation of our game possible. I want to show you one last example video, and this is some of our alien dialogue. And I want to show you this kind of saying up front that a lot of these aliens will be speaking in alien dialects. So you're not going to see, in this video they're speaking English, but in the game you probably won't see that. You'll see them speaking in their alien dialects. But I did want to throw this in here to show you how taking the animation that was created for the human faces fits onto the alien faces as well.
Vemrin thought I should follow up on our earlier discussion.
You remind me of myself at your age.
Impudent to the last. As I was saying, she was sent to kill an Imperial spy in the Yavin system. Throughout her torture, she maintained that she was hired anonymously. Well, look who's here. Remember me?
Understanding the Force's mysteries requires that we seek answers everywhere, even inside a beast itself.
Don't push me, child. I will put you in your place if I have to.
This is really fun work. Let me just tell you, I really, really enjoy what I do, and I'm excited to be able to work on this kind of a project. Just before I close, I wanted to give credit to a couple of really important people. Mark Howe is our lead animator, and Kiko Buyo is our senior animator, and Kiko and Mark and I collaborated to design this system. And then Charles Bayer was our principal programmer on the project, and Charles was the one that implemented all the batch processing and that sort of thing. Originally, Charles and I were going to give this talk as a collaboration, but he was in the National Guard and deployed to Afghanistan a couple of months ago, so we're kind of missing him at BioWare these days. And then also, these are the 3 guys that worked on the original Mass Effect system that we inherited when we started looking for a solution to our project. So I hope that as a result of my talk, you've gotten some ideas, and that when you play Star Wars: The Old Republic, when it comes out, that you'll have a deeper appreciation for what we've done to create the facial animation in the game. So that's it. Thanks a lot for coming. We have about 15 minutes for questions, and so if you'd like to step up to the microphone and give me your name and the company you work for maybe, and your question, I'd be happy to take some questions.
Is this on? One question is, do you handle every single line of dialogue of the entire game this way, or do you select maybe very important scenes that you do by hand, or do you do everything through this process?
That's a really good question. No, and the answer is yes. We handle every single line of dialogue this way. Okay. The reason that we do it that way is because it gives us the flexibility to re-record lines, to re-batch process things, to make all kinds of changes, and to just have things be correct when they update. If we were to go back through and select individual conversations to really put some spice on, we wouldn't have the flexibility to make those changes. In addition to that, with the number of character classes that we have, if we were to give, say in the entire game, each character class a certain set of just really quality conversations, to be honest, it would still be too much to handle. And so this is pretty much a necessity for the amount of work that we're faced with.
Okay, thank you. And one other thing, so some of the aliens might produce sounds that humans do not or are incapable of making. So do you take that into account when processing for alien species?
That's a really good question. For the most part, our system handles, pretty much the universal set of consonants and a large array of vowels. And so I suppose if there were an alien sound that was made, we would just kind of have to replace it with something that you would see in English. So yeah, we're not necessarily doing anything special to handle like extreme alien sounds. No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Chungyo Kim. I'm from Nexim, Korea. And you said you used FaceFX.
That's right.
And did you make those subtle facial expressions in FaceFX?
Yes. So the way that we made the facial expressions, we used 3ds Max at BioWare, and we exported facial poses into FaceFX that represent different muscles of the face. So, for example, the zygomatic major muscles or the orbicularis oris muscles, and each pose that we exported represented a muscle pulling. Then inside of FaceFX, we could combine those muscle pulls. We set up each of those as a slider. And then we could, pose the face using those sliders. And then FaceFX has a feature where you can push a button, and it'll create whatever settings you have on your sliders into a combiner node. And those combiner nodes is what became our final expressions.
We use FaceFX too, and I can't find a way how to edit the facial expressions we already made. I can't find a way to edit that after once we created one.
What you have to do is you select the combiner node that gets created, and then at the settings down, this is a really specific software question, but in the settings down at the bottom, you can actually edit the percentages of each of the nodes that are getting passed in, and you can also go and disconnect them if you need to, if you don't want to use one.
One last question. Did you have to scale the animation when you applied the same animation to another creatures, alien species? They have more big faces.
So we have a certain number of body types, and so for each alien head, we'll apply that head to the body type that fits the size most appropriately. So no, we didn't actually scale the animation. We just put the head on the body that it fit, that it was most appropriate to.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions?
Hi, yeah, I actually had a question. You said that you took the Mass Effect system that was kind of inherited to use it with that.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, with the previous BioWare games, with the sheer amount of dialogue in those, were most of that hand-keyed, or did you have a similar system in place to automate most of that?
So the question was, in previous BioWare games, was it all hand-keyed, or did they use some automation? They did that the way the previous guy that was asking a question. They would pick certain scenes that were like their sort of poster scenes, and they would let the animators just go nuts on those and hand key everything. But then for the common set of character interactions, they would use a system that was sort of the grandfather of what we've got here.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
My name is Quentin from Intel.
Hey.
You said you have some other systems for body movement. Are they of a similar vein where you have a bunch of procedural things made up, and do they combine with the facial system?
Similarly, I don't want to get into that too much because I was given authorization to talk about this, and I kind of wanted to hint at the fact that we had a lot more tools, but I don't know. I don't know if I'm actually authorized to talk about all the extra stuff. So,
okay.
But thanks for your question. Any other questions?
Hi, I'm Leo.
Hi, Neil.
You said the head motions are the only actual animations you made, and all the rest were only poses, right?
Yeah, that's right. But to kind of elaborate on that a little bit, our facial expressions are actually animated. So for each facial expression, over the length of the phrase, the animation curve kind of goes fast in and then tapers off and then falls out completely. So it's not a frozen expression. It does have some, in and then taper off and then fall off. So it is animated. It's just not really articulate. Good question. Okay, no more questions? Thanks a lot for coming, guys. It was a real pleasure to talk about this with you today.